This edition of our podcast is brought to you by 360 Health and Well Balanced Nutrition.
Welcome to the Health Geeks Book Club podcast. Listen in as Kristen Norton and Eleanor Russell review all those great health and wellness books you've been wanting to read or you have read and want to talk about. Here's Kristen and Eleanor.
Hello, this is Eleanor and
Kristen.
And welcome to our Health Geek podcast. Today we're going to have some fun talking about another one of the books we've read.
This one was actually the first one we've read as a book club together.
Yeah, it's our introductory text for you and me.
Yes, and boy, we picked a heavy one.
Oh,
this is called The Switch by James Clement, and it is talking about metabolism, ignite your metabolism with intermittent fasting, protein cycling, and keto. Whoa, do we have a lot to talk about in this one.
Oh my gosh, yes. And it came out in 2019, so it's still kind of hot off the press.
Yeah.
You're following that Amazon. Where's the book list that you like to look at?
I like to look at the top books on Amazon.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And he's going to take this deep dive into dietary restriction, which a lot of people I bump into are flirting around with, what do I eat and how do I eat? And they're looking at, he's going to focus us in on restricting calories and restricting protein, which was kind of novel to me. And he's introducing fasting. I know several people who are fasting, and I have done a detox fast, so I've done this. And then he also is going to take us into the ketogenic diet. How many people are out there talking about ketones?
Oh, it is popular right now.
Oh, yes, it is. So he wants to look at what causes the beneficial effects of these three strategies and how they improve our lifespan. And are they using the same mechanism or is it a different mechanism?
Yeah, and who is the publisher? I know you like to...
Simon & Schuster.
Okay, Simon & Schuster.
Yeah, it's a reputable thing. But you know what? When you go into the inside flap of these books, they have this disclaimer, and it says, the author and publisher specifically disclaim all responsibility for any liability, loss, or risk, personal or otherwise, which is incurred as a consequence, directly or indirectly, of the use and application of any of the contents of this book.
Ooh, that kind of feels like a red flag.
Well, it's in several of the books we've read. So I think it's kind of fun that the publishers will say, we're going to put this out here, but
we're not taking any responsibility.
Reader beware.
Right.
So here's some questions that surfaced to me when I was looking at this book that made me go, huh? He asked questions like, should we eat breakfast first thing in the morning? Should we drink milk? Should we eat small meals all day long? How about smoking and drinking? Is that something we should do or not do? And what about nuts? They got so much fat in them. What do we do about nuts? And then are there better fats or not better fats? And it gets pretty interesting what we read in this book.
Yes, he has some very interesting answers to those questions. Ones that are not popular, especially from my point of view as a nutritionist, with what I've been taught through school and such.
Yeah, and all those things I just asked questions about are things that have been recommended to me over my lifetime. You know, those are things that are okay. But let's start here. He goes into this really fascinating history lesson about a compound called rapamycin, which is a compound that bacteria make. And they discovered this thing on Easter Island, which is a fascinating place to go. And this compound has antibacterial, antimicrobial, and immunosuppressive effects, and has turned out to be very, very helpful as we've learned how to do organ transplantation. Because we know when we put a new kidney in somebody or a new heart, we want to suppress the immune system so they don't reject that tissue. And so this rapamycin thing got a whole lot of interest in the research community.
And what does rapamycin have to do with the switch? And what is the switch?
The switch, yes. So this fella that wrote the book, his name is James Clement, and he's not a scientist. He's a businessman, and he owns laboratories. And he has these terrific relationships with really smart people, and one of whom is Dr. George Church, who wrote the foreword, and David Sinclair, who I have met. He's at Harvard, and he has done revolutionary things in the field of aging and how we age and why we age, and this idea of the role of genes and the sirtuins. So I'm pretty impressed with the relationships this author has.
Right. So even though he's just a businessman, he knows a lot of really...
He's studied. And this thing about education, here's a sidebar. What does education mean? Is it degrees that you hold, or is it understanding that you possess?
Oh,
and this fella has self-educated himself.
Yeah.
And it's done very intense work. He obviously has the mental capacity to process the ideas. And so he's written quite an interesting book. And so back to this Easter Island thing, what they found the rapamycin was doing was it was working on a receptor. The mechanistic target of rapamycin has been identified on the cell surface, and it signals the internal workings of the cell to either go into a anabolic phase, which means we're going to build stuff, like we're going to build proteins, we're going to build enzymes, we're going to build structural proteins that, keep this cell working. Or we're going to turn that off and go into what we call a catabolic phase, which means we're going to clean up, break down, repair in a way. We're going to
reuse.
Recycle.
Recycle.
Yeah. And so the titles of his chapters were really cute, weren't they?
Yeah.
He has an interesting one about garbage men and recyclers.
Well, I like that because the switch really is, turning off that building phase so that, our cells can act as garbage trucks and recycling plants to build down and then recreate things. Mm-hmm. So it'll take damaged goods and reuse them. And it's fascinating because the way that our nutrition recommendations are set up, it really doesn't give room for that time in our bodies to recycle.
Yeah, so listeners out there, if you want to tune into another conversation, we have a podcast on a book called Why We Sleep, and it's somewhat related to this, and we'll take that up at another juncture. But let me go back to the catabolic and anabolic. He uses a word called autophagy. And auto means self, and phagy means eating. So it's the self-eating.
That makes me think of Pac-Man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you're reading this book, you'll see that word over and over and over again. And he comes at his conversation from many different perspectives. He's looked at yeast research on worms, fruit flies, genetically modified mice, humans with gene mutations have been the focus of a lot of the studies that he's looked at. It's a very well-documented book. His bibliography is very substantial.
So the autophagy is a really main part of this book. And he goes into these stories about animals and about dwarfs and mutants and all of these different ways that we can turn on autophagy or turn on the switch.
Yeah.
Right? So what are these ways that he's talking about we can turn on the switch of autophagy and the self-cleaning mode?
Well, he's saying that what we're doing in the American lifestyle is that we're keeping ourselves in a constant anabolic phase because we're eating all the time.
Grazing.
Yeah, we eat all the time. And when we're doing that, that doesn't signal the body to clean up itself. And what's going on there is you're looking at some chemicals that you'll secrete. If you're eating animal protein and dairy, you're going to be increasing a compound called insulin-like growth factor number 1, IGF-1. If you eat less of that, you're going to then lower the IGF and you're going to kick up the autophagy. So things that we eat can affect this mechanism that's in just about every cell we have. So if we're staying in anabolic building phase, we don't give ourselves time to repair and clean up. mTOR is never suppressed, it leads to unsuccessful aging, and it triggers illnesses.
Yeah, so he is against dairy. He does not want you to drink your milk.
Nope.
And he tells us about protein cycling.
Yeah.
So really low protein intakes on certain days.
Well, now I kind of take issue with, teased out some of that as I was reading it. He definitely says meat as a source of protein is
okay.
something, no, we don't want.
Okay.
Because it's bringing in saturated fats, for one thing, that are unhealthy. And so their proteins can enter our body dietarily from plants. So in his plan, and we'll get to the plan later in the book, he's going to say protein from plant source, not from a meat source. But in the quantity and the proportions, a lot of us learn, maybe you can help me with this, is it 50% of your daily calories and 30% of your daily calories and 10% of your daily calories? You know, fat was 10%.
Well, fat is 10 to 30%.
Okay.
So protein is usually 15 to 20%.
Right. And then carbs. Is
55. Well,
right.
Well, now we have low carbs, so it can go
That's what I'm saying. But what we've heard for several years was this percentage of calories that you bring in. And then, of course, controlling the quantity of calories you bring in is another issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the protein thing is really interesting. And, you know, a few podcasts from now, we're going to talk about another book that also encourages less protein. But there's also research out there that's saying, you know, as we age, we need more protein. So it's kind of what you brought up earlier when we were just talking about, you can find anything in the research. You can find a research article to prove your point.
Yeah, we were talking about the titles that we're selecting and what we're reading. Pretty much, science can be used to support lots of conclusions.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Right, and so it's up to each of us, I believe, and kind of where I'm landing today is that everybody's different. Everybody's path is different. You have to listen to your own body, and you have to learn what works for you.
Agree 100%.
Yeah, and so we're reading these titles, and we're seeing there's an idea that might resonate with me. But let's tell you what the authors are saying, and you can make your decision as a listener as to whether this is something that might fit you and benefit your health.
Absolutely.
So I mentioned IGF-1, and we talk about insulin. We talk about glucagon. So we're talking about when you eat these foods, your body has this thing called homeostasis, that it likes to keep things in balance, which means we want your blood serum to have sort of constant levels and not have high fluctuations
of these hormones like insulin and glucagon.
Or sugars or, whatever, fats. You're going to pull it out of your bloodstream and either use it or store it.
Right.
And you have these very delicate systems of sensory perception that understand you got too much of this, let's move it out or excrete it or blow it off, or burn it. We have to do something with these. So as you're looking at yourself and your medical care, you sometimes give blood and they will look at levels of certain things in your blood. And this author is talking about your glucose levels are going to be important. Your homocysteine levels are going to be an indicator of inflammation. Your lipid profile, your cholesterol, your triglycerides, you're going to want to measure those to see if you have too much of that in your bloodstream, it might be depositing and making plaque and causing cardiovascular issues. So there are things that you can track about your own well-being. And so eating is kind of where he focuses. He doesn't talk about sleep and exercise in great detail. He does attribute the fact they're important, but his conversation is mostly about eating, isn't it?
Yes.
And were there 4 basic patterns of eating that he kind of explored?
Yeah, what were those?
I think there was a guy that wrote a book called Blue Zones, and that was when I first was introduced to these communities around the globe that have longevity and quality of life and people engaged. And so the Okinawans were a group. These Greek monks were a group. Loma Linda vegans were a group that he shares some of their stories. And these Greek monks, I found them fascinating. They've been studied since 1994 and actually tested their blood, those sorts of things. It wasn't just observational study. They actually measured stuff. But they found that only 11 of these monks developed prostate cancer, which was 1/4 of the international average. And lung and bladder cancer were non-existent. So what is protecting these communities and allowing them to have better health than other people? And it turns out maybe the way they're eating has something to do with it. And they were eating a Mediterranean-style diet. They had 2 meals a day. They only lasted 10 minutes each. And 3 days a week they fasted. So I believe it's from these observations and looking at these populations, another reason to look at fasting, restricting calories, and the ketogenic diet, which is this guy, James Clement's favorite. He likes it.
Yes, that's what he prefers. But I like that he gives you those options. So in the back of the book, he talks about these lifestyles and how you can kind of pick one of these lifestyles to go with and then implement his recommendations from there. And, I like that he gives us the option. I really have learned a lot about the Okinawans. I like following them and the blue zones that you mentioned. So I perked up when I heard that one. I've also, there's a lot of research behind the Loma Linda vegans as well. So, yeah, I like that he gives you options, and then he tells you the keys to turning on.
Yeah, and he comes down with 10 of them, so that I think kind of the bottom line take home here. We're getting to that part of our conversation, aren't we?
Well, if we want to back up, so you brought up the his food plan.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I want Kristen to talk about the switch plan.
So he has this, I don't know, it's not a pyramid, it's a box. And he, at the top, he wants you to focus on healthy fats. So we were talking about percentages and macronutrients. I don't know if that just kind of went over people's heads, but so this is why we brought that up, because now he's recommending 65 to 75% of your calories are coming from fat.
Oh my gosh, is that crazy?
Instead of the 10 to 30%.
Yeah, it's like everything else is saying, no, stay away from fat.
Yes. But then, so now your carbs are at 10 to 25%, and they're coming from vegetables only.
And that's every day of the week, he's saying, right?
Every day of the week.
So every day of the week, you're getting your fats and you're getting your vegetables at those percentages. I mean, yeah, you're low glycemic. That's important.
Low glycemic, absolutely, right. Which means it's not raising your blood sugar very quickly.
Right. It's a little more
or
stable.
Or at all, yeah. And then vegetable proteins 7 days a week as well. And not to exceed 10% of your calories. So he's talking about maybe a little bit of hemp protein, pea protein, or the protein you're going to get from macadamia nuts, which are the only nuts that he really cares about.
Exactly. Yeah. And these other nuts are not good. Peanuts. Oh, no. Don't eat a peanut.
Yeah, I don't agree with this judgment.
There's more to learn. Let's just say we're going to watch this.
Yeah.
Before we throw out the nuts, right?
Exactly. Well, he goes back to it's because of their ratio of omega-3s and omega-6s.
Which is a fun conversation, too.
It is. Yeah, it's a whole nother conversation. But, he does say all nuts are okay, but he's just a big fan of macadamia nuts.
Ooh, I have an idea for another book if we want to talk about the omega-6 and 3 thing.
Oh.
It's called Inflammation Nation. So we might be looking at that one one day soon.
It will be another conversation.
Yeah, and back to his recommendations on fats, he does qualify. He's not saying eat meat, right? Red meats and that kind of stuff.
He says 0 to 1 day a week you can have dairy or grass-fed meat.
Yeah, 0 is his favorite.
Right.
He's
if
not
you
saying.
Must,
yeah, and that's what he's
week.
saying. If you can't do this, I'll let you have it.
Yeah. He's not even a huge fan of fatty fish either.
No, anything with a backbone. That was what I thought was funny. So I'm an invertebrate zoologist a long time ago, and I thought, so now we're talking about shrimp, lobster.
And then sweets, grains, legumes, starches, and nuts only during the fall, which is August through September, or on feast days, and less than 25% of calories. So he's getting really nitty-gritty here on us.
Yeah, and he talks about going 8 months in anabolic and 4 months, in catabolic, and 4 months in anabolic phase.
Right, because this is what our ancestors did when they had to look for food.
The hunter-gatherers.
Yeah,
and they would go for long periods of time, maybe getting close to starvation before they found something else to eat. And so, I'm kind of curious about the lifespan of those Neanderthals or whatever. But, this is definitely a plan, and he has it outlined, and he has an annual plan. Like if you want to do 1 month, and then another month, he shows you how to do that. Or if you just want to do it on a weekly basis. But it's pretty stringent.
It is. So the 10 keys to the switch lifestyle. The first one is, the cycling between the anabolic and catabolic states, like
sort of intentionally.
Intentionally. Number 2 is...
Well, he said humans have spent 400 times longer as hunter-gatherers than we have as rancher-farmers. And so he's saying that genetically, we're predispositioned for what he's recommending.
Right, and not all the agricultural foods that we have in our diet these days.
Yeah, and particularly processed foods. What we've done to our health with processing of foods. I think many of us have consensus on we need to watch that.
Well, yeah, if that's the one thing that you do, I would say, is you cut back on the processed foods.
Exactly. Eat whole foods. And so the whole foods he's saying is eat grasses, seeds, nuts, tubers, honey, and grains, but only seasonally when they're available.
Right.
So in the winter, they're not available.
Right. And then he talks about how the diseases of civilization, like diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and Alzheimer's, started occurring in a far greater percentage of the population where we switched from the hunter-gatherer to the grain-based diets.
And I think that you can probably anecdotally see that having happened in your own family tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then he goes in to talk about the different groups around the world who... follow these kinds of approaches that we mentioned, the Okinawas, the Loma Linda vegans, the monks, and then...
and they live longer, disease-free lives.
Right.
So there's a quality of life that they have that a lot of us are missing.
Yeah. Key number 6 is to consume less animal protein and dairy products.
Because it lowers that IGF-1 stuff.
Yeah, we see IGF-1 in all of these books, don't we?
Yeah, because it's going to turn down the mTOR and turn up the autophagy. That word is just confounding.
Number 7, consuming fewer high glycemic carbs. So again, your sugars, flours, processed foods.
Yep, because you're going to turn down the mTOR, turn that switch down.
Right. Now, this is one that I don't think I will ever follow because I love carbs. Number 8, consuming a low enough level of carbohydrates, less than 20 grams a day, so that you continually produce ketones.
Okay. I want to watch this too because I love my kidneys. And I know that your kidneys are processing the waste products of protein degradation. And you have a whole bunch of these beautiful little things called glomeruli that filter the blood in the kidney renal tubules. Really delicate, and so you want to protect those. I'm watching this keto thing. I think if you're going to do it, I don't know. I'm still saying try it for a short period of time, but long term, I want to see more evidence about long term using the keto, getting yourself into that ketosis.
Right.
I'm just not secure there yet. I could get there. I could be convinced, but right now I'm very cautious.
I'm the same way. I need more research. I don't recommend keto. I don't normally help people. I don't coach people who are going keto.
Okay, you're not there yet either.
Nope. There's another dietitian out there that does that. So
doesn't mean you won't change, but right now you just have not.
Show me the research.
Yeah, you're still studying it.
Number 9, try to choose foods that are anti-inflammatory. So the omega-6, omega-3 conversation we might have another time. And then 10, the key to long-term good health is cycling your diet so that you're in that catabolic state about 8 months out of the year and an anabolic state the other 4 months. Quite the recommendations there from James Clement.
Yeah, but what I would say is if you're going to try this, he does have recommendations for supplements. And interestingly enough, 360 Health has the highest quality supplements naturally sourced that one could find on the market. And some of the ones that he talks about are ashwagandha. He talks about vitamin D. He actually says you should take an aspirin a day, and I don't have aspirin, but fish oil supplements if you're not eating products that bring the fish oils into you, and a compound called glucosamine helps with joint health in particular. So if anybody's interested in that, please call me at 360 Health or go to my website, 360health, number 4, letter U.com.
I am all for fasting, and I encourage, baby steps into fasting. However, I can't get on board with the entire switch program. There's a lot of things that I like about it, but at Well Balanced Nutrition, we really do help with baby steps and, making small changes that can be sustainable and build up to a powerful lifelong change. So if you're interested in that, check us out at wellbalancednutrition.com.
And I think the daily practices that Kristen and I get excited about are what make the difference in our health. So this was a good book. I don't know if it gets a big star on both of us, but I am glad I read it. And I will be watching more about the switch because I had never heard of it in all my years of my science exploration. The mTOR was kind of new focus for me, and I'm glad to have been introduced to it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching the science as we learn more about it. It's still very new.
Okay, well, stay tuned. We're going to read another book, and we'll be talking about it.
Thanks for tuning in.
And opinions stated in this podcast are solely those of the contributors and are not necessarily those of our distributors or hosting company. This podcast is copyrighted, and no part can be reproduced without the express written consent of Kristen and Eleanor.